Yes, it is. I just want to reiterate what Warren is saying. I do agree with him that the protocols are being adhered to. The same applies for hairdressers, restaurants, and hotels. I think it's almost safer going to a restaurant or an hotel than congregating on a beach, for example. Especially if you happen to belong to a vulnerable group. Because the restaurants have really gone to town on their.
I have to say, my experience in the restaurants and the hairdressers, people are very vigilant. I have to take my hat off to the Maltese.
It comes naturally because at the end of the day, all the people who are in the industry have gone through 3-4 months now of not having any visitors coming.
Yes,
that's. And the last thing that we want is to bend the rules and then end up having risk. So people will be responsible by virtue of the nature of their business.
Absolutely.
You look after your future.
You have to be careful and avoid these spikes. And people here are cooperating. There's been a massive amount of cooperation here, which is second to none, really.
I'm very impressed, actually.
Health regulation.
I'm very impressed. We're joined now by, to bring us up to date with the stock markets, by Nick Glinsman, who is actually in lockdown in Brazil, one of the places that's been hit so badly. Hi, Nick.
Yeah. Hi,
How are you? How are you?
I have to say, I was just listening in. I would love to go for a haircut.
I think your hair looks lovely, Nick.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, an update about COVID in Brazil. I mean, we keep reading about Brazil all the time.
Well, it's interesting because what we're seeing is a combination of COVID and also dengue. And dengue is more of a concern for us where we are outside of São Paulo. COVID, as I said the last time I was on, I think COVID, where you're seeing it really build is in the favelas, the slums, because of the tightly packed cohabitation and also the lack of, to be blunt, the lack of hygiene. Sanitation isn't at its best there. And I think that's where it's prevalent. Plus also, I go back to what happened in the Lombardy area of Italy. You have in the big cities still have very high levels of pollution. And that's also a negative in terms of improving the outlook for COVID. So I think that's a problem. I think the health system for those that can't afford private health care is under stress and probably can't cope as well as one would hope and one would expect to see it, for example, in the developed world.
Can you give us an update on the global stock markets? Are we
well,
going
today's
to
an
have...
interesting day. I think what's happened is, look, sentiment's driving a lot of things, and sentiment is being driven by a political desire. So, there's shock and horror at some of the data coming out of the US states that had opened up earlier. And I think what we're seeing is people in the stock market, particularly in the US right now, selling on Friday, knowing that they can always buy back on Monday, but not wanting to take the risk for perceived worse data. Now, that data we're seeing is focusing on cases rather than deaths. There is a time lag, and we want to see what's going on with the deaths, which are still declining, funnily enough. But that's not the conventional narrative that people want to focus on at the moment for political purposes. Now, in terms of globally and the markets in general, I still maintain the fact that you will see, particularly in the US and those countries outside of the EU with their own fusion of monetary and fiscal policy flexibility, there's still a lot of ability to increase the help. And in fact, we're going to see before August the 1st, $1 to $2 trillion more fiscal help in the US. And I think that's, you're seeing also countries such as the UK talking about cutting VAT to boost the consumer directly, VAT being a regressive tax rather than progressive. And my view is that what we're going to see going forward is probably the US outperformed the European Union primarily because you have a situation where they have a very flexible, no limits monetary fiscal policy mix. And the Federal Reserve itself has only done enough to what they've defined as stabilize the financial markets, the third part of their mandate. And I've seen some quotes from the likes of Loretta Mester. We have a lot more in the bag if and when necessary. But I think they're waiting for the next fiscal move from Congress. And you're already seeing Mnuchin and Powell discussing that with the likes of Pelosi, what the size is. I think the size will possibly depend on the next week's unemployment data out of the US, which was a very big positive surprise on its last release. So a bit of disappointment there. You'll see a bigger number. Another positive surprise, maybe a lesser number, but I didn't see less than 1 trillion. And then I think that generally what we've seen, and I think this will continue for a while, is if you look at the US and some of the Anglo-spheric countries like the UK, they're very orientated towards technology and services. So during the lockdown, there was less of a hit versus the more industrial, supply chain dependent manufacturing countries like Germany, and for that matter, the EU generally.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you.
I think that continues, okay?
Thank you very much, Nick, for today. Thank you. We're always short of time. To conclude, Professor Brinkhout.
2 points which involve Brazil, funny enough. One and the comments.
We're always short of time, as you notice.
Right. One, death rate is coming down simply because we're getting better at treating the disease, and maybe our immunity is better. Secondly, we have invested 700,000 euros in a vaccine. Mr. Ferner and Dr. Ferner announced this recently, in a vaccine that's not ready yet, which is the Oxford one, which is a very good one. It should be available around about September, October. Oddly enough, they've run out of patients to test. And the number of vaccine companies now, there are 124 in development, 10 are front runners, are heading down to Brazil to conduct their phase 3 trials in Brazil itself. Because that's where there are enough patients to be able to conclude as to which vaccines are the best.
Yes, that makes a lot of
Oxford
sense.
has done this as well. So they're there. Tested vaccine. Vaccine is available to the Brazilians. It's very safe now. It's phase 3. And this will enable us to get vaccines on the market much quicker than would otherwise have been the case.
I mean, what I can see with this, Mr. Zara, that it's brought the whole world to sort of work together, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes, I mean, that's a positive thing out of something that's been quite horrific. To conclude and give a message to the public on behalf of the hospitality industry.
Well, I believe that locally, the management of COVID through the medical authorities throughout this situation have communicated fantastically, managed the situation more than I could ever have imagined, and so that gives you a lot of confidence in the local infrastructure where the medical side comes in. The hospitality industry is very important for the island, and I believe the gradual reopening will allow us to see and manage any hotspots that we need to tackle.
Yes.
And it won't overwhelm us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we're in good hands. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much for joining us once again. I'll be with you next week. I thank my guests, Professor Brinkhout, Mr. Zara, Professor Lawrence, Christian Hunt, and Nick Glinsman. See you next week. Have a lovely weekend.